Hey everyone, ready to dive into resin crafting?
Always ready for some resin talk.
Figured. So many of you have been asking about it lately, and honestly, I get it.
Yeah, resin can be pretty addicting once you get started.
For sure, we got tons of questions about it, and even a whole podcast episode someone sent in.
Oh yeah, the one from Resin Craft Chronicles.
That's the one. How to work with resin, a fun conversation for beginners.
Great episode. Really covers the basics well.
Exactly. So we figured let's do a deep dive into this whole resin thing. By the end of this, you'll know what it is, what you can do with it, and how to troubleshoot if things go wrong.
We'll be covering types of resin, supplies, safety tips, the whole 9 yards.
Especially how to deal with those darn bubbles. I know, I've been there.
Oh, bubbles. Everyone's resin nemesis at first.
Seriously, can you imagine making earrings and they have bubbles?
Totally deal breaker. But don't worry, we'll help you avoid that.
Awesome. So first things first, what even is resin crafting?
Well, simply put, it's mixing two liquids, a resin and a hardener, and they react, going from liquid to solid.
It's seriously like magic. The first time I saw that, I was blown away.
It is pretty cool. And that solid form, you can make so much with it.
I know, right? Like jewelry, coasters, anything you can think of.
Pretty much. And the type of resin you use depends on the project. You've got epoxy and UV resin.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those. Epoxy's the tough one, right? For big stuff.
Yep, super strong, doable. Think tabletops, anything thick that needs to hold up.
So what about UV resin? When would you use that one?
UV resin is all about speed. Cures super fast under a UV lamp, perfect for smaller, detailed stuff like jewelry.
Oh, that makes sense. For earrings and stuff, you want those layers to dry quickly.
Exactly. No waiting around forever for each layer to harden.
Okay, so before we get too excited about making all this cool stuff, we gotta talk safety.
Oh, absolutely. Super important.
And I speak from experience, you have to work in a well-ventilated area.
No kidding, resin fumes are no joke.
Tell me about it. I once tried a resin project in my tiny bathroom, no window open.
Oh no.
The fumes were so strong I had to evacuate. Not fun.
Glad you're okay though. Ventilation is key, and always wear gloves and a mask. Protect your skin and lungs.
For real. Safety first. Now, let's say you're all safe and sound, ready to go. What do you need to have to start resin crafting?
Besides the resin and hardener, you'll need some basic supplies.
Okay, like what? Break it down for me.
Mixing cups and sticks are a must, got to be precise with resin. Then silicone molds, those are super versatile for shaping.
Makes sense. And then there's the fun part, right? The additives.
Yes, additives are where you can get really creative. Pigments, glitter, dried flowers.
Oh, the possibilities. I never even thought about dried flowers.
So pretty. It's amazing what you can do with just a few drops of this or a sprinkle of that.
Totally. So we've got our resin, our safety gear, supplies. Now what? How does this all actually work?
It's a process, but a fun one. First, prep your workspace. We talked ventilation, but also protect your surfaces. Resin spills are a pain.
Oh, yeah, don't I know it? Okay, workspace prepped. What's next?
Then you carefully measure and mix your resin and hardener. Usually a 1.1 ratio, but always double check the instructions.
Gotcha. So those mixing sticks are pretty important, huh?
Absolutely, you want that resin and hardener mixed perfectly. And mix slowly, thoroughly to avoid those pesky bubbles.
Right, bubbles are enemy. So once that's all mixed, what's next? The colors and stuff.
You got it. Now comes the fun part, adding your colors, glitter, whatever you want.
Okay, so can you do layers? Like a layer of blue resin, then glitter, then maybe some dried flowers.
Exactly. Layering is how you get those really cool effects, like those amazing resin geos you see online.
Wow, I never knew that's how they did that.
It's all about layering and letting each layer cure.
So cool. Okay, so you've got your masterpiece all mixed up. Now what? Just pour it in the mold.
Pretty much. But pour it slowly. Remember, avoid those bubbles.
Right, slow and steady wins the race. Anything else about pouring?
Use a toothpick to help guide the resin into any little details in the mold. Make sure it gets everywhere.
Ah, good tip. And use the toothpick to pop any bubbles you see on the surface.
Exactly. But what about those stubborn bubbles that hide?
Oh, yeah, those are the worst.
For those, we have our secret weapon, the heat gun.
Wait, really? A heat gun?
Or a torch. Gently wave it over the surface and the heat makes the bubbles rise and pop. Magic.
Okay, that's all. So once you've poured, pop the bubbles. What then? Just wait?
Yep, let it cure. That takes 24 to 48 hours, depending on the resin and thickness.
The waiting is the hardest part. But I bet it's so satisfying to finally demold it.
Like opening a present. You never know exactly how it'll turn out.
So true. But what if, after all that waiting, it's not perfect, like a rough edges or something?
No worries. A little sanding can usually fix that right up.
Yeah, good to know. Sanding, the resin crafter's best friend.
It's a lifesaver.
Okay, before we get into fancier stuff, we gotta talk about when things go wrong. Because, let's be honest, it happens.
It definitely does. Resin crafting can be tricky.
So, what are some common problems people run into?
Sticky resin's a big one. Usually means the resin and hardener weren't mixed right, so double check those measurements.
Gotcha. Accurate measuring, thorough mixing. What about those bubbles that just won't go away?
If they're really stubborn, try pouring in thinner layers. Helps prevent air pockets from forming in the first place. And don't forget your heat gun.
Okay, bubbles be gone. What about cloudy resin? I've seen that happen. It's so annoying.
Cloudy resin usually means moisture got in somewhere. Make sure your workspace is dry, avoid humid days, and if you're adding stuff like dried flowers, make sure they're completely dry too.
Makes sense. So it's all about controlling the environment.
Exactly.
So last question about troubleshooting. What if the resin just doesn't cure? Like it's still sticky after the 48 hours?
That's usually a sign of mixing issues too. Double check everything, and if it's still sticky, you might have to start over.
Ugh, the worst. But sometimes, gotta do what you gotta do.
It happens to the best of us.
Okay, any other words of wisdom for our resin-curious listeners?
Start small. Don't go for a huge project right away.
Yeah, like maybe coasters or keychains. Those seem like good starter projects.
Absolutely. Get the basics down first, then go wild with your creativity.
I love it. This has been so helpful. I feel like I'm ready to try resin all over again. We'll be right back with more after a quick word from our sponsor. We're back. More resin talk.
Ready when you are.
Awesome. Okay, so we covered a lot about the technical side of resin, but I want to talk about the fun stuff, like all those cool seasonal craft ideas from that podcast.
Oh yeah, the seasonal crafts.
I was thinking about it during the break, and imagine resin ornaments for the holidays.
So sparkly.
And those little resin pumpkins they talked about.
Those are adorable.
Right. And I was even thinking resin snowflakes or even icicles.
Resin icicles, that's a great idea.
You could even put little fairy lights inside them. So pretty.
See? So many possibilities. And what about Valentine's Day crafts?
Ooh, yeah.
Heart-shaped coasters, little pendants with rose petals inside.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute.
Right, or even tiny resin love letters.
Okay, now I'm really excited about resin. You've totally opened my mind to what you can do with it.
It's not just about practical stuff, it's about expressing yourself.
Totally. Capturing memories, making beautiful things.
That's what it's all about. And with resin, it's so versatile, you can really make it your own.
I love that. Okay, besides the seasonal stuff, any other cool resin techniques you think we should talk about?
Oh, tons. We mentioned those layered resin geodes earlier.
Yeah.
Those are a great way to step up your resin game.
They look so cool, but also kind of complicated.
They seem that way, but honestly, the process is more straightforward than you'd think.
Really?
It's all about layering different colors, adding things like glitter and crystals.
And then letting it cure in stages, right, to get that layered look.
Exactly. Patience and precision are key.
Gotcha. And speaking of, I know the podcast hosts talked about joining the resin crafting community.
Oh yeah, the community's amazing.
But why is that so important? I mean, besides sharing your work with others?
It's so much more than that. It's about connecting with people who get it, you know?
People who love resin as much as you do.
Yes. It's a great way to learn new things, get inspired, and also find support if you're struggling with something.
That makes sense, like having a whole team cheering you on.
Exactly. There are so many online groups, forums, even local workshops.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah. It's a really welcoming community. Everyone's happy to help each other out.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about the how-tos, the creative side, the community, but I want to know, why is resin crafting so popular? What is it about it that people connect with?
That's a great question. I think it's because resin offers this unique balance of control and serendipity.
Control and serendipity. That's an interesting combo. What do you mean?
So you have control over choosing your colors, the things you add, the mold you use. You're designing it, right?
Right.
But then you have to let go and let the resin do its thing as it cures. That's the serendipity part.
Ah, I see. So you're kind of collaborating with the resin itself.
Exactly. You're guiding it, but also letting it surprise you. And that's what keeps it exciting, even for experienced crafters.
I can see that. It's like a little misery every time you demold something.
Totally. And I think there's also something very therapeutic about working with resin.
Oh, yeah, you've mentioned that before.
The whole process, mixing, adding colors, watching it transform, it's really calming.
It's a little escape from everything else going on.
Definitely. A way to disconnect from the digital world and just create.
So true. And that's something we all need these days.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to ask our listeners something.
Okay.
What is it that draws you to resin crafting? Is it the creativity, the process, the mystery of it all?
Such a good question. Something to think about as you start exploring resin yourself. We'll be right back with the final part after a quick message. We are back and ready for our final resin crafting chat.
Time to wrap things up.
I know, I'm a little sad, actually. I feel like I could talk about resin all day.
Me too. It's such a fun topic.
We've covered so much, but before we officially sign off, I want to pick your brain a bit more about your resin journey.
Happy to share. What are you curious about?
Well, how did you even get started with resin crafting? What drew you to it in the first place?
It actually started as a total accident, believe it or not.
Oh, no way, really?
Yeah, I was trying to make a birthday gift for a friend. just a little jewelry dish, and I completely messed up the first few tries.
Oh no, but I guess that's how we learn, right?
Exactly. But for some reason, I was hooked. Something about the resin itself, the way it moved and changed, it just fascinated me.
So even though it was tough at first, you were determined to figure it out.
I was. It was like a challenge, and I love a good challenge.
I feel that. So what was it that kept you going? What made you want to keep experimenting with resin?
I think it was the discovery part of it. Like each time I tried a new technique or added something different to the resin, it felt like I was unlocking a secret.
Ah, I get it. Always something new to learn.
Exactly. And that's what I still love about resin, even now. There's always more to explore.
That's so inspiring. It's like what we were saying earlier, that mix of control and what was the word?
Serendipity.
Right, you have a plan, but then the resin does its own thing too.
Totally. And sometimes those happy accidents are what make the most beautiful pieces.
I love that. So before we say goodbye, I want to focus on our listener for a minute, the person who's been listening to us this whole time, learning all about resin.
They're probably ready to get started themselves.
Exactly. So what advice would you give to someone who's brand new to resin crafting?
Honestly, don't be afraid to mess up. Everyone starts somewhere, and those early mistakes, they actually teach you a lot.
Mistakes are just part of the process, right?
They are, and honestly, they often lead to even better ideas.
It's so true. Anything else?
Oh, and be patient. Resin crafting takes time, you know. You won't be a pro overnight.
It's like anything takes practice.
Exactly. Don't get discouraged if your first few pieces aren't perfect. Just keep practicing and experimenting.
Keep playing with it.
Yes. And one more thing. Don't be afraid to break the rules sometimes. There's no one right way to do resin.
Oh, I like that. So it's all about finding your own style.
Exactly. Try different things, see what works for you. And remember, the resin community is there to help if you get stuck.
Don't be afraid to ask for help or get inspiration from others.
The community is so welcoming and supportive.
This has been so much fun. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm seriously itching to get back into my own studio and try out some of these ideas.
I hope you do.
I will. And to our listener, thank you so much for joining us on this resin crafting deep dive. We hope you feel inspired and excited to start creating your own resin masterpieces. Remember, have fun, be yourself, and don't be afraid to experiment. Happy crafting, everyone.